Welcome to Ofofo Studio. My guest for today is Somil Goyal. Somil is co-founder and COO at Project Brains. What they do is taking startups from idea stage, where not much has been laid out, to fully functioning companies. They achieve that with means of providing those said startups with fractional workers. What fractional work means, I'm going to get into it. But first, Somil, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Angad. Fantastic.
Great, man. So I was just talking about fractional work in the introduction, and I mean we do something similar, but for CISOs we call them VCISOs, virtual CISOs. It essentially means the same thing, but this is something that we've stumbled across, right? Like we can see the markets dictating that because like a CISO hiring a CISO full time is not possible for companies that we work with. Like they're under 1,000 employees. A full time CISO costs a lot, and the work is only about like 10 to 20 hours a month. So that was a problem that we saw. We set out to solve it, but it seems to be something that you've seen at scale. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, so you got it, Angad, right? I mean, as you say, there are so many times when in a business you kind of don't need a person for a elongated period of time. That could be you need a person only for a few weeks or a few months or a few minutes, or when you need a plumber in your home, you just need a plumber for a couple of hours. You don't need to have a plumber on call all the time. Equally, there will be times when, as you kind of were saying, you don't really need the person full time, like 40 hours a week, right? Or whatever hours a week. You only need the person to come in on a regular basis, but only for a few hours a week, a month, a day, whatever. Equally, another sort of facet that we see. So I mean, time, of course, is money, and all of those aspects. But another aspect that we see, and I'm curious how it sort of applies to information security, is look. I mean, I've worked for large companies for many years at a time, and I always found that month on month, year on year, my knowledge about the company grows, and my knowledge about the rest of the market kind of starts to atrophy a little bit, right? So in something like information security, where you always have to be on the cutting edge, I personally feel that the longer you work inside a company, the greater the amount of effort that you have to make to be on the cutting edge of what's happening in the market, right? Whereas if you're working with a virtual information security officer for a business, you're able to kind of get the right person with the right kind of skills when you need it. So very often it's also about skills. Something works at a point of time and then it stops working or needs to be changed before it sort of works. And these are the sort of things which is a lot easier for businesses to do. If they're working with fractional talent or fractional specialists. And in this model, we work with startups and scale-ups, absolutely, including companies who are going from 0 to 1, but also, all types of ambitious businesses. We kind of like to say, anyone who wants to grow at more than 30-40% a year, they need to do some different things. They can't just do more of what they are doing. And therefore, they should talk to a fractional specialist to figure out how they can really unlock their growth. So growth is what's sort of really creating the most amount of traction, the most amount of demand for fractional specialists is what we see in our community.
Makes a lot of sense. So Somil, you mentioned that you've worked with a lot of large companies. What makes a person working with large companies get down to working with smaller companies?
Yeah. No, that's a great question, right? I mean, when we started, this was about 3 years ago now, we really did not have a clear idea of who would be a typical fractional specialist, right? Would there be people who are on the way to retirement and therefore want, a balance of life and golf, work and golf, or what? So what we've really discovered, it's a whole range of people in terms of experience, age, and mindset. So you asked me the question about somebody who works for a large company. And we had one such person who used to work for a really large bank. I wouldn't name them, but they're one of the largest banks in the world and one of the largest banks here in the UK. And this person worked with a retail banking sort of business, and he was a senior person there, a CEO for UK retail bank or maybe even international retail bank, I'm not sure, but quite a senior person. His passion was the green economy. And this goes back a couple of years when, a lot of green economy concepts were very much at that infancy stage. I'm thinking back when the COP was held in Glasgow. What he wanted to do was to kind of dip his toes and understand a bit more of what is it like to work in a green economy company, which is maybe developing a new business model or experimenting with a new set of technologies in energy transition or whatever, right? That is not something that he could do in his bank. They had sustainable finance and green economy jobs, but in 100,000 employees, maybe they had a couple of hundred people who did that, if that, right? Maybe 50 people who did that. So he couldn't really just kind of leave his role and try and get a role in that much smaller department. So what he did was, he spoke to the head of his business, his boss essentially, and said, "Hey, I would like to work through Project Brains with the green economy or sustainable finance company. It is not competing with the business that the bank is doing, and we had some sort of guardrails to make sure, intellectual property and non-compete and all of those things are in place." And then he could actually spend 5-10 hours a week mentoring or advising, or at times even hardcore sort of hands-on helping a sustainable finance company kind of go from whatever level they were to 50%, 100% bigger in a 6-month period. And that's an example where somebody is working for a large company. Just last week, I was talking to somebody who works for a hyperscaler in New York. And he's on, he works as a fractional specialist with almost half a dozen companies, So the hyperscaler does not really see that as competition. In fact, they see it as a way to get more business, to get more use cases to them. So, people may have a full-time job or maybe running their own business or whatever, and they could still be fractional specialists. That's something that we discovered through our community over the last couple of years.
Makes a lot of sense. And that's where I see, people progressively moving towards. If you see, a lot of work is going to be centered around the skills that you possess and the kind of gigs that you get, smaller projects. And you can work on those at your own speed, at your own velocity. And you could, again, and you have a top level view of a lot of things as opposed to working on a smaller problem in a smaller company.
Yeah.
So what is it that you personally help companies with? If you were to work as a fractional, you do, I'm sure, you work as a fractional executive. So in that, what are some of the skills that you possess or some competencies that you can tell us about which you've helped companies with?
No, absolutely. I do that quite often. And it could be a number of things. So skills is one aspect of it, of course.
Right.
Another angle of it is experience, right? Mm-hmm. So if you've seen a kind of problem a number of times in different scenarios and different facets, then it sort of helps with risk management, scenario planning, and so on. Somebody else may have the same amount of skill, even better skill, but may not have that experience to kind of help with that scenario planning, risk management. So skills, experience, and I suppose the third thing that very often comes in our community, and including for me, is networks, right? So a lot of times what people really want is they want to connect to more people. They want to, talk about their story to more people, get their product in front of more people, get more input, feedback, advice, and all that. Okay. So, I'll take an example. A very large international consulting company, this was a couple of years ago, was trying to set up a fintech lab in London, in Canary Wharf, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, a lot of consulting companies have set up fintech labs and so on. And there is a particular pattern that they follow when they do that, right? They'll go and talk to their large customers, they'll talk to senior management, they'll come up with some sort of a scenario, and they'll try to sort of realize that scenario. But through the network, this opportunity came to us. And as Project Brains, as a team, as a community, as well as me personally, they wanted me to work on this engagement. We tackled it in a very different way, right? So what we said was, look, let's actually figure out not so much what the clients or senior management want right now,
Yeah.
but let's try and make a call on what's the direction of travel, where the puck is going, as they
Nice.
say in America. And that we are going to get from a variety of sources, not just from senior management interviews or client interviews, right? So
Right.
so let's go one step down and let's see what are the major issues that are facing the financial industry. And then what we focused on was something which maybe wouldn't have come to us naturally, through sort of bottom, top down sort of guidance. And what we really focused on was the absolute explosion. And this was sort of latter end of the lockdowns and the pandemic, etc. But there was a massive explosion in payment fraud.
Oh yeah.
We see that in India as well. Every time I visit, I see Amitabh Bachchan talking about, how to avoid being, how to avoid being scammed and things like that. The same thing in the UK, the same in the US. That
Yeah.
story moved basically from credit cards to bank payments to a whole variety of things. I mean, nowadays these frauds are happening in the context of, I mean, yesterday I saw it on the BBC in the context of funerals. People are sort of anyway, so payment fraud and this combination of technology in terms of telecommunication, social media, and ease of making payments was creating this new category of scamsters or criminals, and they were causing a fair amount of financial loss to financial institutions and account holders, people like you and I,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
also a lot of emotional harm to
Absolutely. Yeah.
individuals.
Yeah.
The feeling of kind of being scammed and so on. So
Yeah.
we kind of we focused on that. We zeroed in on that and said, look, this is a major societal issue. This is something that we would have to solve, not just through new product development or a new fintech or whatever, but we'll have to solve by a lot of people coming together. We'll have to solve through a mix of technology, processes, data, new ways of working, and so on. And therefore, this particular fintech lab, at least for the first 9 to 12 months of its existence from launch, would sort of focus on trying to solve this problem.
Wow.
And then we got together a number of financial players, large and small, fintechs, but also civil society, right? We got together groups like Stop Scams UK or Citizens Advice Bureau, to kind of create holistic solutions around how could that fraud be tackled, both in a micro as well as a macro way. And that sort of really helped this particular consulting company to achieve their goal. And again, this doesn't so much come from skills of market entry and technology or fintech or sales and marketing, but it comes from a mix of experience and networks around how can we really look at problems in a wider way.
Absolutely. But I can imagine, like actually, I can't. I can't imagine being on top of so many things. Like, if you're helping out a company who already specializes in something, you would want to understand more about their domain and domains that, they are interacting with. And like so many variables. You just you took one example and you painted a beautiful landscape around it with all the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
variables that could interact with it. So my question to you, Somil, is how do you stay on top of things? What kind of content do you consume? What kind of research did you do? What are the kind of people that you talk to? How do you
Yeah.
go about doing your projects?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is true for me as a person as well as Project Brains as a business. We look at it sort of not so much as a company or a business, but as a community,
Okay.
right? So every person who's a member of the community has got a slightly different perspective of the problem set or of the scenario,
Right.
and sometimes one scenario or one perspective is more valuable than another one, and that's the approach that we try and take in our business, right? We don't kind of say this is always right, this is always wrong. That's the sort of thing that we are trying to avoid, right?
Nice.
But
Yeah.
to say, look, what are the options? What are the different ways in which this problem can unfold? What will be the implication if scenario A, B, C, D happen? Which ones is more harmful to us, more beneficial for us? What can we do to kind of achieve the more beneficial scenarios and avoid the more harmful scenarios? That's what we try to do. I mean, my co-founder, for example, in my business is somebody I went to university with, so I've known him for 25, 30 years, right?
Nice.
That sort of increases the level of trust and mutual understanding. A lot of people in our core team in Project Brains, they are people who, we have known each other for 10, 15, 20 years,
Nice.
and done different things. And now we're kind of coming together in this community because, we genuinely see this as an important way forward in the way in which, especially the growth sector,
Mm-hmm.
can progress, right? So is that mindset, I feel, which sort of helps us to be a little bit open minded, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore, you talk about what content do we prefer to consume.
Right.
I mean, we try and sort of use less or consume, or at least I personally try and consume less of top down content. So, I'm a subscriber to FT, for example, Financial Times. But
Mm-hmm.
what I most enjoy in FT is not so much their, I mean, I like their news and editorials, etc., as well. But what I really enjoy the most is what they call Alpha Well, which is a much more sort of open diary style reporting on
Nice.
financial happenings, corporate happenings, and all that. And writers and editors of Alpha Will, uh, Ronit Ghosh, Robin Wigglesworth. These are the people who I tend to follow a little bit more because, again, by having that mix of inputs, we can
Mm-hmm.
kind of see where the journey is going. And I dare say, I mean, you guys kind of believe the same thing, right? That's why the whole
Absolutely.
sort of podcast studio and everything.
Yeah, we try, Somil. All
Yeah,
right. So
yeah, yeah.
we touched upon like you spoke about some of the people that you work with. So at Project Brains, can you take us through how what kind of how the responsibilities are divided, who are the people, and
Yeah.
a bit about
Yeah,
your
yeah,
co-founders, the core team.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the core team itself is growing. It's sort of almost a dozen people now. One common factor is nobody works full time, long term as part of the Project Brains core team, right? So we believe in fractional. So we have to eat our dog food. Everyone is fractional, right? Including me, including the other co-founders, and so on. So it was started by two of us. Both of us went to university together in the late 90s. And then, of course, kept in touch. We both sort of live in London. He's been in London for 25 plus years. I've been in London for about 20 years. So, we kept in touch socially and so on. And then about 3 years ago, we decided to launch this business. Other people in the core team, again, we know them through our alumni network, so they came in and they wanted to help. And then, over time, we've had other people who have sort of joined us through the Project Brains community to become members of the core team. One of them, she's of South African origin and is doing a PhD in
Nice.
Netherlands, and looks after our community operations on a fractional basis. Another one is she's a dual French British citizen, lives in south of France. We're all jealous of her lifestyle. And she helps fractionally as our chief marketing officer. There are people who are helping us on the technology side. Again, very often students, master students, who nowadays are encouraged to work 20 hours a week, which I think is a great thing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then, rather than working in a bar or in a shop, which is the most common way of sort of student employment,
Right.
they would work through Project Brains and, kind of use their
Makes a lot
core
of sense. Yeah.
skills. Yeah, yeah. So some of them are in our core group. So yeah, I mean it's a community. It's fractional. Everyone is fractional, and very often we think of ourselves really more like a university study group rather than sort of command and control. I'm responsible for X, you're responsible for Y. We kind of meet every week. We figure out what are important things for us to do this week and over the next 4 to 6 weeks. Who has got the best kind of skills, experiences, time to kind of tackle those tasks, and then sort of divide up the tasks really. And of course, patterns emerge, right? So, like I said, somebody looks more after marketing than others. Somebody else looks more after community operations than others. Somebody spends more time in finance and invoicing and tax than others.
Right.
So I mean, all of those sort of centers of gravities emerge, but really, it very much is a flat structure, and that's how we intend to scale it, at least for now.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So, I mean, what are some growth roles that you see around which fractional work would crop up? I mean, some
Yeah,
growth industries that you can talk about. Say, for example, you could say like
yeah,
accountants are already fractional for a lot of companies. But are there any other roles
yes,
which are full time as of now, but like within the next 5 years or so, you can start seeing something
yeah,
fractional coming out of it? Yep.
yeah. So domains wise, the areas where we see most of the demand, most of the supply, are things like sales and marketing. I mean, fractional chief marketing officer, fractional VP of marketing. I mean, these things have existed for at least 10 years, if not more, right?
Right.
So that then applied a little bit also to sales. That's something that we specialize in. I mean, especially for enterprise sales, you kind of have times of intense action followed by weeks or even months of waiting, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's how enterprise decisions get made, and having a lot of capacity which is directed towards an account does not always help, and sometimes even harms, really. So,
Absolutely.
fractional models applied to sales, account management, partnerships, market entry strategies. Fractional models applied to sales is a big area that we've always seen and we continue to see. Technology, more and more, right? I mean, young companies would have, or new companies would often have fractional CTOs and so on, rather than a full-time person, mostly because they can't really attract, a seriously skilled, seriously experienced technology person
Right.
into the team very early on, because the problems that they're facing are not really that complex, right? So it's not very attractive for a very skilled technologist. Fractional finance directors are very, very common in the UK. I don't know if they are common in India or not, but they're certainly very common.
Yeah.
What we try to do in Project Brains is kind of go one level down to sort of say, well, not just the finance director, but who's doing your financial planning? Do you really need somebody for doing your financial planning all the time, or do you kind of need that person maybe twice a year, once for budgeting, once for forecasting, and then maybe a few hours here and there, every couple of months, right?
Right.
Same thing with taxes. Do you really need a head of tax? And what stage do you need to be as a company to really
Right.
need a full-time head of tax or whatever? Treasury, the same thing. So we're kind of going one or two levels down within finance, and we're seeing a lot of traction there. So yeah, I mean, sales and marketing, technology, finance, compliance. These are the areas where we see a lot of demand. Industry-wise, it kind of depends on what the growth story is. So when we started
Right.
about 3 years ago, it was a lot of SaaS companies. As interest rates went up, SaaS companies found it a lot tougher. Fintechs really was a really strong growth lever for our community a couple of years ago. It's still there, but a little bit less. What we're seeing a lot at the moment is data and AI, because obviously in the last year or so, ever since ChatGPT came around, AI is really, really hot. So,
Yeah.
everyone wants to kind of get some fractional AI specialists. And the one area which is building up, and I think will continue to grow, is renewable energy. I mentioned sustainable finance and so on in the beginning, but yeah, renewable energy is an area where the total amount of installation, development projects, linking projects to the grid, the whole commercial models around it. I mean, this is such a big area. The skills that are available in the market are very, very small, and therefore some form of mutualization or fractionalization is the right way forward for a lot of developers. So that's another area where we see a lot of growth.
Yeah. Somil, you brought up a very interesting point over there, which is the coming of age of AI, right? I mean, we've got now. Tell me one thing.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that ChatGPT can already do, right? I mean, it's replaced the job of a content writer and a graphic designer in our team. So I've seen that personally. Are there any other
Okay.
roles that you see within, say, about 5 to 10 years, roles that can be managed with just AI? Like you wouldn't need a human intervention there.
No, it's an interesting question, right? I mean, we ran a poll in our community. This was, I don't know, 6 months ago or something, where we asked which role in a senior management of a large corporation will be the first to be replaced purely by an AI algorithm, right? So would the CFO be replaced by an AI algorithm, or the chief product officer, or the chief marketing officer? And offhand, I'm sorry, I don't remember what the consensus there was. But I don't know. I mean, you probably know more about it, because you talked about how you're doing more content generation and graphic design using AI. At least the way we see within Project Brains and with businesses in our community using AI is I mean, two or three sort of use cases, right? One is it's making a person more effective. So, fractional marketing person with the help of AI is more productive and more effective than perhaps a full-time person could have been. But not so much, wholesale kind of replacement of human work by AI. At least that's not something we are seeing, at least at our scale, right? Again, if it's much larger, work can be organized differently. And that sort of replacement dynamic can also happen. But that's one way we are seeing things. Second, we are seeing things, and that's probably more valuable, at least in my mind, is using AI as an ideation partner. And a lot of these Copilot type of products, some are not so good, some are very good. So, how can anyone, how can everyone use AI as an ideation partner and therefore be a better version of themselves, right? Whatever skills they have, whatever practice they have, right? I mean, how can they actually improve that? That's something that we are seeing a lot of. An adoption of that. I think it's impossible to say what things will be like in 10 years from now, because that's a very long time, right? I mean, I think the progress is actually happening in short steps and more and more. I've worked as a consultant for a number of years. I do wonder what the future of consulting would be like, right? When slides can be generated by AI, and in a consulting team of 20 people, maybe 6 are always just writing slides, right? And if they can use AI to generate slides in 5 minutes, then maybe then you'd sort of say, yeah, I don't need 6 people, I only need 5 or 3 or 2. So yeah, I mean. But also, ideation, scenario analysis, a lot of these things probably can be done better with help of AI. So yeah, I mean, I don't see, or at least so far, I don't see sort of wholesale replacement of roles or functions, but really sometimes empowering, sometimes reformatting. That's the way I'm kind of seeing it. A good friend of mine, he's a member of the Project Brains community, kind of focuses on monetization matters, pricing, and those kind of things within the CFO domain. He always says that AI would be like Excel was to accounting, right? Accountants didn't disappear, but they started doing different things because Excel was available. So maybe it'll be a bit like that. Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So another thing about fractional work, Somil, is I don't think we spoke about how easy it is when like the person who's working for you doesn't need to be geographically close to you, right? I mean, you could get something
Yes.
done with people who are from completely different time zones, and
Correct.
still get the same kind of quality in your work, right?
Yeah.
So and you could also benefit of the cost arbitrage. I mean, like if you're
Yes.
hiring from developing countries. A bit about
Yes.
that, like any customer stories or any projects that come to your mind.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's not new to a great extent, right? I mean, offshoring, outsourcing, nearshoring, I mean, those models have been available for 20, 25 years, if not longer, right? So a lot of larger companies have already tried that. A lot of smaller companies, from what I see, are also trying that. Before Project Brains, I used to work for a fintech startup, as part of the management team there, and we used to use nearshore development as a way to amp up our capacity and to kind of preserve our runway. And we were a really small company, right? So, but still, we kind of did that. Not always, but from time to time. So, so these concepts are not new. A lot of people, if they're looking for sort of cost arbitrage, they don't normally come to us because they'll find other solutions quite easily. They come to us because they have hard to solve skills problems, right? They want to kind of restructure their teams and kind of act in a very different way. So those are the sort of stories that we see. But then, yeah, I mean, it absolutely opens up the field, right? And cost kind of often becomes secondary when location kind of becomes that important, right? So I'll take an example, right? We're working with a company which is a renewable energy developer, which is developing wind farms, offshore wind farms all around the world. But one of their areas is the Baltic Sea. Right now, there aren't really that many people who know what sort of project risks can come up when you are trying to install, very tall towers in the middle of Baltic Sea where it's very cold and whatever, right? So if you need project risk people, you can't just get a project risk, and this company is headquartered in Northern Germany. They can't just get, any project risk person and expect that person to be effective. They want somebody who has done that before, whether that somebody now lives in Indonesia or Scotland or Mexico. They kind of need somebody, at least some capacity, for someone who kind of has done that before. So it's, those are the sort of stories that come to us where they are hard to solve skill problems rather than cost arbitrage, because that exists absolutely, and we use it, everyone uses it, large companies and small use it, and that's a clear part of the global supply chain going forward, right, as it has been for 20 years. But yeah, our community does not really specialize in those sort of models. But that said, we focus on two use cases. One is UK companies growing, both locally and internationally, so exporting and so on. And second is international companies coming to Europe, so Singaporean companies or Australian companies or American companies coming to Europe. So absolutely, working internationally is clearly an important part of us as a community. But not so much for cost arbitrage. It's mostly because they're trying to get a specific skill, a specific type of experience, which is hard to find. Yeah. So one thing which that's quite fresh. We are still in process of digesting it, but we have recently been awarded an innovation grant by the UK government, and that's about applying AI. Surprise, surprise, to the future of organizational formation. So classically, companies grow by writing job specs, hiring people, or writing invitation for tenders, RFPs, and hiring subcontractors or consultants to kind of do work for them. We all know how poor quality the average job spec or the average RFP or the average invitation for tender is, right? It's basically copy paste, copy paste, copy paste,
Absolutely, yeah.
which has happened 5-6 generations. And a good proportion of what you see on the paper is either irrelevant or confusing or kind of obfuscates the real issues and things like that. And we are basically saying, hey, we can actually use AI, both the generative AI aspect, but also the expert system aspects, to actually help businesses understand their problems better, diagnose the problems better, express them better, and therefore figure out who's the best specialist to work with, rather than writing very generic job specs or RFPs and getting very mid-range talent working for them. This can help with business growth, but this can also help. In the UK, there is this massive problem, and I think in many other countries too, where there is a pretty large proportion of working age population which is not working for a variety of reasons, right? Maybe because they have some family commitments, and therefore full-time work doesn't really fit their life stage. Or they have some other limitation, right? They need to be in a particular location for whatever reason, and they find it difficult to find full-time work in that location. But they can all be fractional specialists, right? I can live in Northumberland and advise a German company on project risks in building up wind farms, right? Or a Taiwanese company in building up wind farms, because the wind conditions there are something which are somehow similar to Northumberland, right? It can happen. So it actually is very, very good for the underemployed sort of specialists as well. So for these reasons, we're trying to kind of figure out what's a good way to apply technology and help people diagnose their problems better, and therefore get matched to better specialists. That's something that we are looking to launch in a beta testing format in September, October, so in a couple of months from now. And if it goes well, kind of spruce it up next year. So that's a big bet that we have right now.
That's amazing, Somil. How can people reach out to you? How do they get in touch with Project Brains?
Yeah, so you can send me an email, sg@projectbrains.io. You can check out our website, https://projectbrains.io. You can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active there. And unless you are sort of just plain selling me something, I would respond back to every message.
All right, so you heard him. All of you viewers and listeners, everything that was spoken about will be included in the description. The links, if they were mentioned, they'll be there. And Somil, you are one of the smartest people I've spoken with. Thank you for this.
All right then.
Very excited about what you're doing. Look forward to the next episode. Bye-bye.
Good luck to Ofofo as well.
Thanks.